What's up, everybody? I'm Coach Tyler with Fencer's Edge, and today we are going to be looking at how to perform a counterattack in foil fencing. Now, if you don't already know, a counterattack is a defensive action that you can make when you do not have the right of way. Now, in order for you to get the touch when performing the counterattack in foil fencing, it needs to be a one light action, meaning your opponent cannot touch you, whether it be on target or off target. If your opponent hits you, whether it be on target or off target, you will not get the touch. If your opponent scores an off target touch, there will be no point and the action will resume. If the opponent does score an on target touch, it will be their attack because they have the right of way. Now, in this video, we're going to take a look at a few counterattacks, and we're going to break down how to do them effectively and what you're looking for in your opponent in order to initiate the counterattack. And at the end of the video, we'll go over a few examples of failed counterattacks and why they failed. Okay, so let's get started here, and we're going to watch this first counterattack action. All right, so let's watch the action one more time in slow motion here. Okay, so there's a few key aspects to making the counterattack. Number one is the distance between you and your opponent. This is the most crucial part of the counterattack, okay? You want to be close enough that you can make your counterattack quickly, but you don't want to be too close where your opponent can hit you. So you want to find that sweet spot of just outside of their lunge reach and no further and not any closer, okay? So that's how you want to be moving when your opponent is pressing you, okay? You don't want to be too far away, otherwise your counterattack will fall short and your opponent will just hit you, or they'll see the counterattack coming and they'll parry it and hit you. And you don't want to be too close because then your opponent will just finish and you won't have time to make the counterattack. Okay? Now, what you're looking for to make this counterattack is you're looking for two key things in your opponent. Number one, you want to make the counterattack when your opponent's point is not pointed at you. So if you notice here, my opponent's blade is pointed down, away from me. Okay? So that's a really crucial part. If my opponent's blade is pointed right at my target area, when I try to make my counterattack, it will be really easy for my opponent to just place their point on target and hit. Okay, so that's number one. You want to make sure that your opponent's point is away from you, whether it be down on the ground in this case, or it could be up in the air or off to the side. Either one, that's fine, but you want to make sure that your opponent's point is not on you. Okay? Secondly, you want to make the counterattack in a time where your opponent is making their first step. So if you watch here, sorry about that. So if we watch here, my opponent's making that front step, and that's when I am launching my counterattack. So right when my opponent is stepping forward with their front foot, so before their back foot has hit the ground, and preferably, if you can time it, you want to be making it while your opponent's front foot is still in the air on their advance. Okay? Now, if you notice here, after I've performed the counterattack, my opponent starts reaching to score a touch. Now, I do two things after this counterattack to make sure that my opponent can't get his point on target. Okay, so number one is I start moving my target area by turning my left shoulder away from my opponent and stepping my back leg behind me, okay? This displaces my target area and makes it much harder for my opponent to get the touch. The second thing that I'm doing is with my hand, after the counterattack, I'm bringing my hand down to block my opponent's touch, okay? So depending on where your opponent's blade is at the moment of your counterattack will depend on where you're closing out to, where you're blocking their finish. So here my opponent's blade is coming from low to high, so I'm closing out by bringing my hand down. Okay? If my opponent's blade was high, I might try to close out by bringing my arm up, okay, to maybe a 6 parry. All right, so that does it for this action. Let's take a look at the next counterattack. All right, so let's take a look at this next action. All right, so in this action, I'm doing a few things differently than I did the first action. So another good way, again, the most important part about this is the distance that I'm keeping, okay? Now for this counterattack action, you'll notice that when I'm on defense, I am searching for the blade and making small fake counterattacks in. So he doesn't know whether or not I'm going to make a real counterattack or a fake counterattack. Now the searches for the blade are I'm trying to get him to move his point away from the target area. Now on this action, I notice that my opponent takes a really big step here and pulls his point away from my target area. If you notice, his blade is going up over my head. That's what I'm looking for here in my opponent in order to make this action. Okay, I'm looking for a big step forward or a change in tempo in my opponent's press, and I'm looking for, are they making that big change in their tempo or that big step and pulling away their blade? So here my opponent takes a big step and pulls his point away, and I know that I can step in for the counterattack. Now, the other really crucial part to making an effective counterattack that I didn't mention in that first example, but that's super crucial, is that you are pressing forward with the counterattack. Now, if I don't step in with my counterattack here, my opponent will have the distance to score the touch. But because I'm pressing in and moving forward here, by the time my opponent's point comes down, his point is already past me. Okay? So stepping in and jamming that distance or closing the distance between you and your opponent is crucial. So the other thing that you can do to make your counterattacks more successful during the bout is to, when your opponent is attacking you, is to pull distance a lot and make them fall short, or to make lots of parry reposes. So you're setting up the time to make the counterattack. So your opponent learns that if they're just making fast, direct attacks, you're going to pull them short or to parry them, like you'll see here. Now, I do this action numerous times during the bout before attempting any of my counterattacks. So I'm pulling distance, keeping the distance really wide, and then when my opponent gives me a fast direct attack, like he does here, I just parry it and repose. Okay, so now let's talk about some mistakes that you can make when you are trying to make a counterattack. All right? Now, let's go ahead and take a look at this action, and we'll talk about the mistakes that I make that makes this ineffective. Okay? So, here, I am really trying to force an action. So I'm really thinking about what I want to do here. Now, the problem with that is I'm focused on me and I'm not reading my opponent. I'm not watching him intently and focused on what he's doing and making my reactions based upon that. Okay, so I've got kind of a one-track mind during this touch, and that can be really detrimental to your fencing game when you're trying to force a particular action instead of being focused intently on your opponent and watching and waiting for the right moment to happen. All right? The other thing that I'm doing wrong here is I am not really moving my feet. I stop moving my feet and I go dead on my feet. When you are not moving your feet, it is really easy for your opponent to close distance and hit you. It's hard for you to go from a standstill to moving when you need to. So even if you don't want to travel distance on defense, it's really important that you keep those feet moving. Even if you're stepping small in place, that will allow you to get back and make a defensive action more effectively. All right. Now, the other thing that I do here is I make a really big search and a really big parry. Now, big arm movements, whether you're fencing foil, saber, or epee, is a big no-no. You want to be a surgeon with your blade and not a wild and crazy lumberjack. All right, so another example of how a counterattack can fail is this. Let's take a look at this action and we'll talk about the mistakes that I'm making here. All right, so here for this counterattack action, I do a few things wrong. Number one, I'm late with my counterattack. My opponent has already launched his attack, and if you'll notice here, his point is already on target. So in this case, this would be a time that I want to parry, because his blade is right there, and it's easy for me to parry. When your opponent leads the attack with their blade, with their point on target, that is not the time to counterattack. That is when you want to parry because their blade is right there in front of you. So you don't want to try and counterattack if your opponent launches their attack or initiates their attack and their point is on target. Okay, that is a really crucial thing to making your counterattacks effective, is not trying to counterattack if your opponent launches their attack and their point is at your target area. You want to launch your counterattack when your opponent's point is not on your target area. So those two things, number one is you don't want to be late with your counterattack. Here he's already launched his attack and I'm counterattacking. Number two, his point was on target here and I go for the counterattack. Number three, I might have been able to pull this off if I stepped forward with my counterattack. But if you notice, I just tried to counterattack by staying in place and trying to avoid or move my target area out of the way. 9 times out of 10, if you're just standing still with your counterattack, it's not going to work. Or even worse, if you try to back up with your counterattack, that's not going to work. You have to step forward with your counterattack. This will allow you to get the timing, and it will make it much harder for your opponent to land the attack. Alright everybody, that does it for this video. I hope it helps you perform some awesome counterattacks and win the bout. Now, if you have any questions about making counterattacks or any other fencing actions, please make sure to write them down in the comments below. I read all of your comments and I really appreciate them. Thanks for all the love. And as always, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment below. And until next time, have fun, work hard, and practice.